Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. William Small, your money mentor, and I'm the founder of DrWill Enterprises and the host of Wealth Builder Seminars in Dallas, Texas. I hold a PhD in Biblical Studies, and I've written over 10 Bible-based business books, and I've helped hundreds of people quit their jobs, start businesses, or earn extra income by working from home. The information in my videos is better than what you will receive in some of the best business schools in the country. I'm sharing this gold-plated knowledge with you for free, so the only thing that I need you to do for me in return is to subscribe to this channel and share these videos with your family and friends. Now, if you're ready to get more information on how to become an entrepreneur, you can go to my website and download my ebook, Preparing for Entrepreneur Excellence. Those who do will be glad you did. All right? Amen. Now, this is episode 5 of my Preparation for Reparations video series, and this one is titled Racism as it Relates to Capitalism. And I pray that this series will increase your knowledge about what racism actually is and how racism actually is a product of capitalism. And I spent 20 years in the military teaching everyone from soldiers to commanders how to win war. And one of the principles of engaging in warfare is to know your enemy. And it's very difficult to defeat an opponent if you don't know who he is and how he thinks and what he is most likely to do to try to defeat you. And one of the reasons black people have never been able to defeat racism is they don't know what racism actually is, how it works, and why it works. And as I've explained in previous videos, if you allow people to control your language or your understanding of what words mean, they will be able to control your economic future. And since black people have been bamboozled about what racism really is, our detractors have been able to keep us positioned on the bottom rung of the economic ladder. And if you listen carefully, your understanding of what racism is and how it works is going to change today. All right? Amen. Now, black people either don't seem to grasp this fact or maybe they just don't want to hear it, but racism is not a dislike toward another person because of their skin color. That is the definition of bigotry and prejudice. A racist is a person that has the power or the means to control the economic future of others. But the way racists determine whose economic future to control is usually based on their race or skin color. It is almost impossible to force a racist to change by public pressure or political pressure or social shame, because racism is a belief system that is a type of religious belief system. And the fact that the word racism ends in the suffix ism tells you that it means a belief. And religions such as Catholicism, Judaism, Buddhism all have the suffix ism because they are belief systems. Now, capitalism, or the economic system that America operates on, is also a belief system. Racism is the belief that certain groups of people should always remain on the bottom of the economic ladder. And capitalism is the economic system that racists use to ensure that certain groups of people will always remain on the bottom. And the reason they keep certain people on the bottom is because capitalism is also a belief that certain groups of people must always be on the top of the economic ladder. Capitalism is the system that racists use to ensure that this select or privileged group gets to remain on the top. And I chuckle whenever I hear supposedly educated people talking about systemic racism, because that is an oxymoron. Racism is an economic system, therefore saying systemic racism is redundant. Everyone that is a capitalist is by nature a racist. And when you look into the boardroom meetings of capitalists, you can see immediately who they believe should always be on top. Capitalists are racist because they work to ensure that people who are not in their race never gets an opportunity to be on top or to control their own economic destiny. A racist is one who has the power to project their belief onto others and can subjugate others economically as a result by their words or deeds. And contrary to popular belief, those who are not capitalists don't have the power to maintain a system that is used to control your economic future, therefore they cannot be racist. Those people may be very bigoted or prejudiced, but they are not racist because they do not have the power to control anyone's economic future, including their own. Capitalism is a system that places restrictions on certain groups that prevent them from having an equal opportunity to participate in the economy. Now, I spent 20 years as an intelligence analyst, so it is easy for me to recognize patterns. And if you look at the pattern of capitalist conduct, since black people were freed from slavery, they have done everything that they can to prevent us from participating in programs that allow white people to build wealth for their families. They actually wrote into the legislation for some of these programs, like the Homestead Act, where the government gave away land for free, or the Federal Housing Act, where people were given low interest loans to buy homes. that stated unequivocally that black people could not be included in these opportunities. When black men returned home from fighting the nation's wars, for example, they were not allowed to take advantage of the GI Bill. And all throughout history, our white counterparts were given opportunities to build wealth or equity, while we had to march, fight, and beg, and even plead first for our own humanity and then for equality. And we haven't had time to fight for equity yet because the capitalists keep us too busy fighting for basic humanity and equality. This is why Republican politicians who give power to the capitalists through politics refuse to pass a bill that will take away the legal protections of police officers who terrorize and kill. My fervent prayer, ladies and gentlemen, is that God will save this country from the GOP. And again, capital in this context means to be on top, okay? Capitalism is the belief in devotion to a certain doctrine that people in the economy must always be on top. And conversely, it is also the belief that certain groups of people must be on the bottom. The practice of capitalism ensures that certain people will always be on top, and racism is the system that ensures certain people will always remain on the bottom. Racism is simply a belief in a religious type of doctrine of who should be allowed to participate or win the race for economic supremacy and who should be the recipients of the redistribution of their wealth. Now, capitalists use religion to trap individuals financially who have the cash to migrate to the top by taking 10% of their income and redistributing it to others. And the goal is to ensure that these people remain in the middle or near the bottom of the economy. Now, for some reason, it is hard for people to see that the foundation for capitalism is racism. The economic system of capitalism would not survive and capitalists would not exist if it were not for racism. Capitalism was built on slave labor, and most capitalists built their fortunes on either slave labor or slave wages. Capitalists are by nature corrupt and evil, which is why laws must be enacted to legislate their actions, and their business practices must be regulated. And there was no law against slavery in this country, so the capitalists went to other countries, kidnapped people in order to force them to work for no compensation. Therefore, an amendment to the U.S. Constitution had to be enacted in order to end slavery as a business practice. Capitalists earn trillions of dollars from this business practice with the aid of law and politics. Therefore, black people must be compensated for their unpaid labor with damages. White people in America who believe that black people are not entitled to some kind of compensation are too bigoted to realize that they are the sons and daughters of the devil. You would have to be evil to know what has been happening to black people for over 400 years and not have enough empathy or compassion to realize that they need some kind of remuneration. If someone hit your car, you would want to be made whole immediately, right? You can't see that black people's lives were stolen, put into slavery, raped, hung, beaten, and broken. So how evil can you be if you can't see that black people have been suffering needlessly for centuries, so they need to be made whole immediately? The culture of white bigotry is so profoundly anti-black, and there's nothing that makes a bigot angrier than when he or she believes that black people receive something that they didn't deserve. But white culture has conditioned otherwise good people to believe that black people are undeserving of anything. And whenever you hear white people complaining about where their tax dollars are going, that's based on a cultural belief that black people don't pay taxes. They've been conditioned to believe that black people only consume tax dollars. So I want to ask them sometimes, if you believe that it's such a great benefit to live off other people's tax dollars, let's switch places, okay? Let me take your job that gives you money to pay taxes, and then you take the job with income so low that it qualifies you for government assistance. If you think that that's living easy, let's switch places, okay? But I know you won't, because you know that what you're saying is just white bigoted rhetoric, and if for nothing else, black people need to be compensated for their character being castigated for 400 years. Now, we're going to reserve the most obvious justification for compensation or the many inhumane acts that occurred during slavery for last. However, from the Emancipation Proclamation of 1865 to 1899, American slave descendants enjoyed great freedoms, participated in and made great contributions to the political progress of the nation, and we made great economic strides in building businesses and achieving parity with our white counterparts. But whites begin to view our desire to be as good as they are socially and economically as a threat, and they started taking violent action to reverse the gains that we had made. The first tool of destruction that these holders of American Christian heritage always employ is the lie. This is the tactic that they use today. Whenever they want to destroy a black man, they first destroy his name, sully his reputation or character, and then it's okay to kill him. Okay? When a black person is killed by a police officer, this tactic is used to justify his murder, and this is why the media always report everything about the person's background that was killed, but they report little or nothing about the person who killed him. The media never camp outside of a police officer's house to get comments from him or his family, so why do they always want to interview or get statements from the victim's family? Through a constant barrage of media propaganda, black men are portrayed as bloodthirsty animals that harbor craven desires to ravage white women. Dylan Roof said that this is the reason he went into that church and murdered 9 black people. And under the pretext of defending white womanhood, white mobs lynched or shot thousands of blacks, burned millions of dollars of homes and businesses and farms, and displaced thousands of black people during the period of 1900 through 1920. In the summer of 1919, aptly named Red Summer, brought 26 of the most deadliest white riots in U.S. history. And the underlying tensions for these riots were due to the migration of Southern blacks into the North, who began to compete with whites for jobs, housing, and union wages. And whites saw the need for economic control, so they began to employ terrorist tactics in order to regain and maintain control. Whites destroyed or burned black-owned centers of economic industry. And in 1923, again under the pretext of defending white womanhood, a white mob destroyed the black town of Rosewood, Florida. 8 blacks were killed, and hundreds of black families were forced to abandon their homes and businesses and farms, which the white rioters then stole. Now, when I say white people, I'm not talking about all people, okay? I'm talking about only the bigots, okay? And this is the reason why I always say there are 2 types of Caucasian in America, white people and white people. When they do all the evil things they do for no apparent reason, the only thing you can do is shrug your shoulders and say, white people. See, white people know that there's no such thing as white supremacy when black people are dominating society economically. So another attempt to remain economic control in society or regain the perception of white supremacy led to the riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A white mob burned and bombed and looted Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. That area of Tulsa is commonly referred to as Black Wall Street. The affluent black areas of Overtown or Liberty City in Miami, Florida, were bulldozed in the 1950s to build a highway through their economic centers in order to facilitate white flight to the suburbs.
Overtown was a viable community in which people had common causes and related to each other. There was economic development, businesses, furniture stores, clothing stores, a soda water bottling company. The professionals, doctors, lawyers, other professionals were there. Youngsters were considered youngsters of the community, so that everyone felt some responsibility for youngsters.
You know, everybody was like family. There was so much togetherness, so much, everything there was like close-knit.
It was a place, a focal point for black people. Segregation, of course, contributed to that, but segregation caused it to be a community.
I-95 was put in to go directly through Overtown. It divided Overtown into east and west. Overtown went from some 40,000 people down to about 12 or 15,000 people in less than a decade. This overpass behind me is just one of the evidences of how the interstate was built to ride over the community, so that if you didn't really want to see black people, all you had to do was not look down.
White riots and supremacist activities continued openly from 1900 until the 1960s, until blacks began to riot in response. Yet blacks were still losers in those battles because hundreds of blacks' lives were lost and millions of dollars in properties in our communities was damaged or destroyed. The 1970s brought the racist tactic of economic appeasement by giving the leaders of the Black Power movement jobs and the promise of integration. Okay, now, the absence of hunger made the leaders listless, while integration actually destroyed the infrastructure which held black communities together. And once the businesses were destroyed, politicians then began to destroy the black family structure. And with the infrastructure gone that supported black employment, black men were deprived of jobs, and this led them to engage in petty crime and drug activities to support their families. And then in the 1980s, laws were created to trap black men into long prison sentences for drug and criminal activities, thus leaving women and children unprotected. The objective of this neo-slavery tactic, thanks to an exception written in the Constitution's 13th Amendment, was to reverse the roles of men and women in the black community by making the woman a provider and protector instead of the man. And this was merely a continuation of what was done during slavery to destroy black families and control black people psychologically and economically. In his book, Survival Strategies for Africans in America, Anthony T. Browder discusses a document titled "Let's Make a Slave" that was filed away in the basement of a Southern courthouse. And the following is an excerpt from that document, which describes the physical and psychological process called seasoning that was designed to break the spirit of a newly arrived African and prepare them to live a life in captivity. In citing one of the cardinal processes for making a slave, it states, "Take two of the meanest and most restless niggers and strip them of his clothes in front of the slaves, tar and feather him, and tie each leg to a different horse faced in opposite directions, set him on fire, and beat both horses to pull him apart in front of the remaining niggers. The next step is to take a bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger to the point of death in front of the female and infant. Don't kill him, but put the fear of God in him, for he can be useful for future breeding." Then the writers of this document describe the impact that this murder and beating would have on the black woman and her baby. It says, in her natural uncivilized state, she would always have a strong dependency on the uncivilized nigger male, and she would have a limited protective tendency toward her independent male offspring and would raise the female offspring to be dependent like her. Nature had provided for this type of balance, and we reverse nature by burning and pulling one uncivilized nigger apart and bullwhipping the other to the point of death, all in her presence. And by her being left alone and unprotected with the male image destroyed, the ordeal caused her to move from the psychological state of dependent to a frozen independent state. And in this psychological state of independence, she will raise her male offspring and female in reverse roles, and in fear of a young male's life, she would train him to be mentally weak but independent but physically strong. But because she has become psychologically independent, she will train her female offspring to be psychologically independent. And now you've got the nigger woman out in front and the man behind and scared. And this is the perfect situation for sound sleep and good economics. In all of the horror they were forced to endure, the Jews never had to suffer being tarred and feathered, set on fire, and pulled apart by horses, yet they got reparations without much debate. Jews were never subjected to the psychological debilitation that blacks had to suffer then and continue to suffer from today. Failure to recognize that the Black Holocaust is another reason that we must demand compensation. We lost dozens of times more people in the Black Holocaust than the Jews did, and their children are not still suffering from the psychological effects of it as our children do today. Jews should be the main ones, other than us, proclaiming that black people deserve compensation. African Americans are justified in demanding compensation to undo the damage done to the minds of black youth, okay? And there was a group of black high school students working as tour guides in the Holocaust Museum when I visited there back in the 90s. And while explaining the importance of his job, one of the kids said, "It's important that we learn what happened in the Holocaust, otherwise something like this might happen to us." And apparently this kid didn't know that there was already a Black Holocaust, okay? This child's statement was indicative of the fact that the adults in his life were too damaged psychologically to teach him his history. And too many blacks are so confused about their own history and culture that black children don't have a clue. And it's scary to know that a young black person has been conditioned to refer to the Jewish Holocaust in the actual and the African Holocaust in the hypothetical. The Jewish Holocaust lasted a few years, while the African American Holocaust continues today, unabated and uncompensated. The Africans who survived the Middle Passage torture chamber and became slaves were stripped of their freedom, their family, their name, their cultural identity, and we were forbidden by law to read and write. This didn't happen to the Jews, okay? History has not recorded that the Jewish husband was ordered to leave his house while a German oppressor raped his wife whenever he felt like it. History has not recorded that the Jewish woman was forced to stand by and watch while the German oppressors beat, mutilized, burned, or hung members of her family. History has not recorded that the German Constitution classified the Jew as only 3/5 human, a little lower than human, and a little higher than an animal. And history has not recorded that the Jews suffered being sold on an auction block by cattle. This is why, my American Judeo-Christian brothers and sisters, that black people demand compensation. America gave Jews compensation for the wrongs Germans committed to them, and we simply demand that you give us compensation for the wrongs Americans committed. Slavery and Jim Crow were sanctioned or made legal by local, state, and federal government action, and as such, blacks had no equal protection under the law. The activities of white mobs and groups like the KKK went unpunished. The kidnapping, cross-burning, and church bombings and so on was in effect state-sponsored terrorism. And as a result, blacks have been terrified, vilified, and ostracized by our own government for centuries, and we have been economically and socially marginalized by American system of capitalism and racism. Capitalism and racism are the progeny of America's economic system, and black people were designated to be the permanent victims of capitalism and racism and banned by legislation from participating equally in that system. So we are justified in demanding compensation from the U.S. government and the American citizen. Well, that's all that I have for now. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and share this video with your family and friends. And I'll be back with something new that nobody told you. Until then, remember that God loves you, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I'll see you next time on Wealth Builder Seminars.